Is your stablecoin now a security? The SEC didn't pass a law, but they did just issue a policy statement that might change how stablecoin issuers, founders, and investors should approach the market. If your stablecoin offers returns, relies on reserves, or markets itself like an investment, then this video is for you. So let's break down what the SEC actually said, how this affects your product, and potential traps to avoid, and how does the Genius Act and the Stable Act, which are ultimately going to be wrapped up into one piece of stablecoin legislation, apply. Hey everyone, I'm Corey, a startup lawyer helping entrepreneurs decode law, technology, and innovation. If you're building anything in crypto, tokenized payments, or asset-backed stablecoins, this video is must watch. While the SEC's statement isn't a formal rule, it's a clear signal that enforcement could be coming if you don't play within the bounds. What did the SEC say? On April 4th, 2025, the SEC issued a staff statement that's not law, but functions like guidance or potential warning shot of boundaries that need to be respected. So what are their key concerns? Stablecoins used for trading or investment may be securities. Disclosures must be robust, especially around redemption, reserves, and custody. Avoiding volatility does not equal avoiding securities law, especially if your token depends on potentially managerial efforts. What does a founder need to know? If you're building a stablecoin project, let's quickly look at your to-do list. Clarify your use case, payment utility versus speculation. Make sure you audit your marketing. Remove investment or growth-related language. Add plain English disclosures. How does redemption work? How are reserves managed? You should probably ditch incentives or pseudo yields or dynamic pricing games that we've seen in the past in this market. The SEC now considers your marketing language to potentially be legal evidence. So next, let's look at redemptions and reserves. That's a new area of focus. The SEC especially is focused on whether users can redeem their stablecoins, whether the reserves are segregated, verified, and disclosed, whether you're using risky or synthetic instruments as backing. Importantly, this lines up with MiCA in Europe and the legislative proposals like the Stable Act and the Genius Act here in the US. There'll be a separate video on that whole process, so stay tuned. Even if your stablecoin isn't a security, you'll still be held to similar transparency expectations. Okay, so now let's look at the regulatory environment between the SEC and Congress. This isn't just about one agency, it's really a three-pronged approach. So the Stable Act puts stablecoins under Federal Reserve oversight. The Genius Act gives states and fintechs a framework with consumer protections. Ultimately, the Stable Act and the Genius Act will be rolled into one piece of legislation, and we'll ultimately find out who wins out. Does the state have some say, or is it only the federal government? So stay tuned. The SEC still wants jurisdiction, however, if your token looks like an investment. So the bottom line here is even if your token is US Stable Act or Genius Act compliant, if you market it like a security, you could still fall under SEC purview. So is this enforcement by blog post? This is not a formal rule, it's a statement, but it does function to warn the market, provide rules of the road, and it sets up enforcement. It also signals to Congress that the SEC wants to keep certain areas within their purview, specifically where things fall as securities, which would make perfect sense. If you're a founder, this means you're walking a bit of a tightrope. You need to build for tomorrow's legislation while protecting against today's enforcement. And the one thing I'd say on this is that the last 60 to 90 days have had more clarity around a business-friendly environment and the ability to go talk to your various regulators. And so that should make life easier for founders. Now, if you are a founder and you're potentially rolling out a product that falls under this purview, you're gonna need to look at pitch decks, landing pages, white papers, token documents. You're not going to want to have things that fall within the bounds of these statements that could be considered speculative. If you're in the stablecoin arena, you're going to want to clarify redemption mechanisms, limits, reserve audits. You're definitely going to want to talk to the relevant professionals to make sure you've got all your box checked, especially if you're operating globally and have to deal with regulations both in the EU under MiCA as well as in the US, because these should be coming very, very soon. Okay, so let's recap. The SEC's April 2025 stablecoin statement isn't law, but it's a very close thing as a statement telling you that your disclosures, messaging, and your reserves around stablecoins all matter. And you will need to be Stable Act or Genius Act compliant, that final piece of legislation that we suspect coming out of the US relatively soon, and that will trigger scrutiny if you're in violation of those rules. And if you market like an investment, you could potentially be in the danger zone to be treated like a security. Join me on the path to decoding law, technology, and innovation to grow your business. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Until next time.